I'm Jeff Ball. I'm the Associate Chair of Research for the Department of Pediatrics, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. Those of you who've attended these sessions in the past know that we have a visiting scholar with the department and have had her with us for the past couple of months, and we'll have her for a little while longer, Cathy McPhalen, grant writer, editor extraordinaire. Many of us in the department and across the university have worked with Cathy on grants, big and small, variety of topic areas over the years. So she's got a wealth of experience, and the sessions we've done today have been really well received. So if you happen to get a follow-up email with a survey to give us feedback on Cathy's session today, please strongly encourage you to fill it out, because it'll inform the work that we're doing in the future with Cathy and beyond to support research within the department. I don't know if I've missed anything there, Cathy, but I think we may have a few more people join us as they figure out the connection. It was a bit different this time around. So hopefully we have a few more people joining us. I think we had 35 or 37 people signed up to learn from our expert here. So Cathy, I'll hand it over to you, and if everybody, if you have questions or comments along the way, I'm going to be monitoring the chat as Cathy goes through the session today. So please feel free to share questions and comments along the way. Over to you, Cathy.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, as at the start of every Zoom session these days, please give me a moment to set up the screen share. There we go. And all right, and I need to see the chat as well. Okay, so we'll start. The title for today is Writing Techniques for Grant Proposals, giving your reviewers an easy read. And I'll talk in a minute about why an easy read is a really good idea when you're writing a grant proposal. But let's just start with first the territorial acknowledgement. So the University of Alberta, its buildings, labs, and research stations are primarily located on the traditional territory of Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, and Ojibwe Saulteaux Anishinaabe nations, lands that are now known as part of Treaties 6, 7, and 8, and the homeland of the Métis. The University of Alberta respects the sovereignty, lands, histories, languages, knowledge systems, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations. So this session is a follow-up to the panel discussion of early August that was on how to write a winning grant proposal. That particular panel discussion focused on strategic aspects of writing grant proposals, and the video and a list of University of Alberta resources and supports for those types of strategic aspects are available at the link on this slide, and these slides will be made available on the Department of Pediatrics webpage after the presentation. So we know in general, and particularly from that panel discussion, that the essential ingredient for a fundable grant application is proposing excellent research. You're not going to get funded if you're not proposing excellent research. But it's important to make it easy for your reviewers to see and understand the excellence of your proposed research. And that's where some of the grant writing techniques that we're going to talk about today can make it easy for your reviewers to see the excellence of your research. So the key in your writing is keeping reviewers engaged and happy as they read. A happy reviewer is a positive reviewer, and positive reviewers give good scores and say, yes, fund this work. Remember that your reviewers are very much like you. They're overworked. They're probably reviewing numerous applications, more than they really should be. they're tired. You don't want to make them work harder than absolutely necessary to see the excellence of your research and why it's worth funding. So how can you make your grant proposal easy for your reviewers to read and understand? You can help them understand the quality of your work quickly and clearly. And you can also help them see quickly and clearly why your work is a good fit for the goals of this particular funding competition. So researchers who write strong grant applications and get them funded use effective writing techniques. And those techniques make their applications easier for reviewers to appreciate. We're going to look at 3 categories of these techniques and examples of some of the ways that you can implement those techniques. So the 3 techniques that we're going to look at: giving your reviewers a map, giving your reviewers a break, and giving your reviewers reasons to care. So as we go along, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and Jeff will let me know when things are happening there in case I'm too focused on other things. But let's look first at technique number 1, give your reviewers a map. Now, this map can be either a literal map or a metaphorical map. But first of all, why do you want to give your reviewers a map of your grant proposal? What you're doing with a map is giving them an overview or a mental framework for your proposed research. You're orienting your reviewers to what they can expect and how it fits together. You can think of it as the kind of wayfinding map that you would see when you walk into a new complicated building. You know where you are, or it tells you on the map, and you can see your destination somewhere off in the distance in the building. But that's not particularly useful until you can see the path from where you are to the destination. And it may also be particularly useful to you and to your grant reviewers to be able to see some of the other things that fit with going from where you are now to your destination. So, for example, where are the elevators located, in case you don't want to take the stairs or your knees are bothering you today? Where are the washrooms located? And even perhaps slightly less direct information that still could be useful if you're expecting to be in the building for a while. Is there a cafe on site so you can go and get a snack if you need it? So the map, the wayfinding map, is telling you the direct information, and it's giving you information about the other parts of the building that may be relevant to getting from where you are now to your destination. The other thing that a map can do for your reviewers is to make their job easier when they need to summarize your proposal, because that's something that they're going to need to do when they want to discuss it at the review panel meeting, and also when they're writing comments to you. So if you can give them a clean, clear map of what you're proposing to do and how it all fits together, that makes their job easier. And again, making their job easier makes them happier and more positively disposed to your proposal. So we're going to look at 3 types of maps that you can give to reviewers. The first one is visuals, and then we'll look at informative headings and at topic sentences. So visuals, the purpose of visuals is to introduce your research aims, the key players in your work. Those could be people, those could be molecules, those could be organ systems, whatever kinds of key players you have for your kind of research. Visuals can show data flow, information flow from one aim to the next, and links among the proposal components. So here's one type of visual. This is an actual metabolic map. It's showing the tissues and some of the pathways and the molecules involved in this case, something called the Cori cycle. no need to worry about that if this isn't your area of work. But it's a map. It's showing how the molecules flow through the different tissues and how they change to produce metabolic results. Now, you can take a simple map like this, you can customize it to your particular research proposal and give your reviewers even more information. So you can add to the map locations for where each of your aims will be targeted, how you plan to inhibit or enhance particular pathways within this diagram. What are some of the molecules involved? Put them in explicitly, etc. And you can add information, arrows or whatever, on how data for one aim relates to other aims. So that's one very kind of explicit, literal map of what might be happening in your proposed research. Another one that's more applicable to things like clinical trials or experimental protocols with multiple steps or branches is a flow chart. This one, you're not going to be able to read it all, not a problem. On the side here, this box is just inclusion and exclusion criteria for this particular clinical trial. But you're showing reviewers an actual map of how you're going to go through the various steps of what you're proposing to do. Are there other types of visual maps that you've used that can be particularly helpful for reviewers? If you have ideas, you can pop them into the chat. And at the moment, I'm having trouble seeing the chat. So Jeff, you might have to tell me what's there.
Hi, Kathy. There's people are probably still thinking
Okay, sure.
about your invitation, but it's a good reminder that
Yeah.
I think
So
the session today is going to be a combination of you presenting and then having some dialogue and discussion with people who've got experience in this as well.
yes, I will be asking you for input from time to time as participants as well. So one other one that I see in many grant applications, another kind of explicit visual map. Many grants these days want to include a timeline for the different aims and the sub-aims or the tasks that you're going to go through. And you can take advantage of that timeline to turn it into a map by adding more detailed information about your aims, about the key players, about, add some arrows that are going to show you how the information flows. So a timeline or a Gantt chart is another obvious visual option. If you think of something as we're going along, again, feel free to pop it into the chat.
We've got one, sorry,
Sure.
Kathy, we have one comment. Someone's asking, Clayton's asking about visual abstracts. Would that be another example?
Yes, actually, that would be a really good example. That's something that some journals are requesting now for research articles that you're publishing, is some kind of visual abstract. And that can be a slide or a series of slides. It can even be a video in some cases. Those are tougher to include in a grant application, but it's the same kind of idea. You're giving people an overview, a mental framework for understanding the article. So yes, good one. Thank you, Clayton. Okay, the next kind of map that we're going to look at is more metaphorical. Make sure I'm in the right program here. So you can give your reviewers a map by using informative headings and subheadings. This is giving them a metaphorical map, and it's a map because it's a way to help your reviewers stay oriented as they read through your proposal. So this is headings, subheadings, subheadings, and even more levels if they are useful in organizing the text in your proposal. So this is just a generic example. Main heading, a subheading, some text, subheading, some more text, etc., etc. But the key to making this useful to your reviewers is to have informative headings, not just generic headings, background, literature review, methods, etc. And you can make your headings more informative by elaborating them with key details. They're still going to be relatively short. You probably don't want them more than a line long if you can at all avoid going longer. But in your heading, you can include details like, what disease are you talking about? What type of studies are you doing? What are the characteristics of the particular populations that you're looking at? Or you can use techniques like, instead of just a word or a short statement for a heading, you can use a question that gets your reviewers thinking about, well, okay, what's the answer to this question? I'm interested, tell me more. So informative headings work as a map because they give you reviewers more information up front. And that's a good way to keep their interest and keep them feeling positive, as well as keeping them oriented. Just as an aside, you can apply this same technique to titles for your figures and tables. Instead of just a brief 1-word or 2-word, not particularly informative title for your figures, you can use an informative, more descriptive title or for your tables. So these are examples of slightly more informative headings. Background and literature review are pretty generic, so ignore that. But in your literature review, you could talk about studies of children aged 1 to 5 years, and then studies of children aged 6 to 16 years. And then you could have the next section of your literature review being a comparison of data on the different age groups. So comparing data on disease prevalence, comparing data on disease progress. These aren't elaborate, super long headings, but they are telling reviewers something about the flow of logic in the information that you're giving them and helping them to understand where you're coming from and where you're going at a glance, which is, the very definition of a map. Where am I starting from? Where am I going? Here's a quick, easy way to know where I am. So these are some examples of good informative headings that I've culled and anonymized from grant applications that I've worked on. So things like the first problem, vulnerable populations in an underserved setting. And you could customize this even further. What specific vulnerable populations are you working with in your proposed research? What's the specific underserved setting that you're working with in your proposed research? The second one here is an example of a question style heading. So why is C. elegans an excellent model system to study mitochondrial diseases? Well, your reviewers may not know, or they may think they know, but you want to tell them something different or better. So get their attention, get them interested in reading further. When you're going through the section where you describe your research team, if you're working with a group, instead of just saying team, you could say an experienced multidisciplinary project team. So you're giving some characteristics and some information about why you've got a good team. And then you can go on in your paragraphs that follow to talk about where they are experienced, what their disciplines are, and so forth. Or for an aim, identify symptoms and practices with the greatest impact on care and patient experience. And again, you can customize this to types of symptoms, types of practices, types of care, types of patients, whatever works for your particular situation. So if you were to look at any of these 4 examples of informative headings, let's try an exercise going in reverse. If you were to take one or any of these and turn them back into an uninformative heading, what might your uninformative heading read? And you can put your suggestions in the chat. And while you're thinking and putting your suggestions, I'm going to try to get it up. So there we go. Now I can finally see the chat. So the first one, absolutely. You could just call it problem or problem number one. Pretty uninformative and boring. So good example, Jess, thank you. Any suggestions for the other ones? What I would probably do with the question style one, yeah, you could say see elegance, or you could just say, even more boring, you could say model system. And just many people are really good at making not bad ones, but less informative headings. Yeah, number two, disease model. Yep, that's a great one. Thanks, Clayton. Number three could be just team. That's the one that most people use for that particular section. So yes, you can see the standard kinds of things that people put in and how you could make your headings and subheadings much more useful and interesting for your reviewers. Okay, so visual maps, informative headings. Oh, aims, yes, yeah, aims. Thanks, Rita. Yes, that's about as generic as you can get and totally uninformative for your reviewers, or almost totally. Let's take a quick look at the third type of metaphorical map that you can use to help keep your reviewers oriented as they're reading through your proposal. And that is, make sure you're using good, strong topic sentences. Now, the topic sentence model that I want you to use is to have the first sentence of every single paragraph in your proposal state the point or the conclusion for the information that follows it in the paragraph. So number one, it's the first sentence, and number two, it's giving the point or the conclusion of the paragraph. Now, why is this type of topic sentence particularly useful for reviewers? So think a little bit about the path that your reviewer is going to take in reading through your grant proposal. Are they going to just start at the beginning, read to the bottom of your 10 pages or however many pages you're allowed, and say, oh, great, okay, give them the money? Possible, but highly unlikely. More likely is that they're going to start by skimming the proposal, glancing at different sections, reading your informative headings and subheadings to get an idea of what you're talking about. While they're reading, they will probably be jumping around within the proposal. So they're going to get down to your methods. You're going to be talking about a particular technique that you're going to be using, or something that relates back to a paragraph in your background information. And so they're going to have to jump back to the background section, look for the paragraph that's got that particular topic in it, and then jump back to the methods. Or they may need to jump from methods down to your section on significance and impact. So it's not going to be a linear read. You can make the process much easier for them by having a topic sentence at the beginning of every paragraph, because then they can just go dip, 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 looking at the start of each paragraph. And after they've looked at maybe 3 paragraphs in your background, voila, they've hit the paragraph with the information that they need. Quick and easy. That's much more difficult to do when you bury the topic sentence, the point or the conclusion, in the middle or at the bottom of a paragraph. So let's take a look at a sample paragraph. And this, as in some of these other presentations, is a paragraph that came from my PhD thesis from many years ago. But the first sentence here summarizes the point of the paragraph. And the remaining sentences all relate to specific points about genetic manipulation and how it's useful in understanding structure-function relationships in proteins. So you start with the general point, the main point of the paragraph, and then you put in the details. Now, let's look at an example that doesn't have a topic sentence. This particular paragraph, I've actually removed the original topic sentence, which in fact wasn't a particularly good one anyway. But this paragraph starts with a relatively specific sentence about the serine residues in the enzyme active site. And it doesn't summarize the rest of the points in the paragraph. So read this through quickly. You don't have to understand the details. This is basic biochemistry. And see if you can either create a topic sentence that you could put at the start of this paragraph, or what you can often do is find another sentence that's buried in the middle of the paragraph that would actually make a really good topic sentence because it summarizes things. So in the chat, you're welcome to create your own topic sentence. But if you can find a sentence in that paragraph that could be moved to the start of the paragraph as a topic sentence, let us know that too. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. And you don't need to type an entire sentence into the chat. You can just put in the first 3 or 4 words of the sentence, and we'll get it figured out from there, unless it's your own sentence. Okay, looks like, okay, all right, we've got one. Essential histidine. That's possible, yes, because in that case, you'd be organizing your paragraph around the concept of the catalytic triad. So yeah, you could move that one up. Another option would be to go to this very general sentence that starts 2 general families of serine proteases are known. And if you used that as, yeah, so that's the one that I'm talking about. Rita's put that in the chat as well. That would be a good topic sentence if you were organizing your paragraph around the concept that you've got this class of enzymes that all use a catalytic triad, but come from different structures. So the topic sentence not only summarizes what you've got in your paragraph, but it's where you indicate the key point that you want to make with the paragraph. So depending on what key point you're making, you could use at least those 2 sentences. If your key point that you want to make is more about convergent evolution, you could use the last 2 sentences here to introduce your paragraph. So lots of different ways that can be done depending on what you're trying to highlight for your reviewers. That's what should be your topic sentence. Okay. So those are 3 possible ways to give your reviewers a map, using visuals, using informative headings and subheadings, and using topic sentences, informative ones that summarize your paragraph in the very first sentence of each paragraph. The next topic or general technique that we're going to look at is giving your reviewers a break. And when I say give your reviewers a break here, I mean, reduce either the physical or the mental burden on your reviewers of reading your proposal. And reading can impose actual physical burdens. If you've got a tired reviewer who's on application number 20 of 25 that sadly happens to be yours, they're going to be physically tired of looking at a screen or whatever. And there's also mental burden. People just get tired. It gets hard to read, to concentrate. And there are a couple of things that you can do to reduce that burden on your reviewers. One of them is simple formatting. And one of them is using shorter and simpler sentences. So let's look briefly at each of those in turn. So simple formatting. Grant proposals, as I'm sure you're all painfully aware, almost always have a limit on the number of pages or the number of words or the number of characters that you're allowed to include in your proposal. And too many grant writers go to extreme measures to fit in all their crucial content because they do have a lot of content that they need to include. They do this by just squashing everything together. This is counterproductive. Why? Well, when everything is squashed together, reviewers can't differentiate the different parts of your proposal. So it's hard for them to remember where they are in the proposal, what came before, what came next, and how it fits together. Reviewers are tired. They need both mental and visual breaks to be able to maintain their focus. And if you give them those kinds of breaks, you're doing them a favor, you're making the work easier for them. And reviewers also need cues for when you're moving to a new section or a new topic or a new paragraph. And you can give them that differentiation, those breaks, those cues, using simple formatting. So here's an example taken from a very old CIHR web page that has no formatting. Everything's looks the same. Everything's all squashed together. Don't even try to read it. It's the visual impression that we want to look at here. So it's hard to read. It's not appealing to look at. I look at it and I think, do I really want to read this? No. And it's not easy to find specific information within all of this. So there's no differentiation of headings or subheadings. There's no white space, which is putting gaps between different sections or topics or paragraphs, physical gaps. Now, if you were given something like this and you wanted to introduce a little bit of white space, a little bit of spacing between components, and guide reviewers through the text, what kinds of formatting tactics would you try to make this more readable, make it easier for your reviewers to understand, differentiate, give them a little bit of break? So put a suggestion or two in the chat, and then I'll show you my suggestion for what you might do. Yes, using paragraphs, obviously. This is kind of broken up into paragraphs, but they aren't obvious because they're all squashed together, bang, 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 one right after the other. Separate the criteria. Yep, absolutely. Both of these you could do easily with a little white space. So putting an extra blank line between paragraphs or in front of each of the criteria, extra line breaks. Yep, that's right, Clayton, exactly. Tabs between paragraphs and bold headings. Yes, there are lots of different ways that you can introduce some white space. You can, within your word processing program, if you don't want to use a whole extra line of space, you can use, say, 6-point spacing after a paragraph. So good ways and multiple ways that you can introduce that kind of spacing to make things easier to read. What about the headings? What could you do with the headings that might make it easier for a reviewer to find their way through this and see where they're going and what the different sections are about? Yeah, you can use bold and underline. Well, okay, I wouldn't use underline. There are readability reasons for not, but you could use bold or italic or combinations of bold and italic. Topic headings, yes. And in fact, Rita, the topic headings are there. We just can't see them easily. So bold and informative headings, absolutely. But we can, even without changing the wording of the headings, we can use some of your ideas here as to turn this into something that looks much more readable, much more attractive, and is much easier for reviewers to navigate. So this is my solution. Doesn't have to be identical to your solution. Lots of different ways you can do this, but I've added white space between things. So you can see there are partial lines between paragraphs and headings. And I've also added different formats for the different kinds of headings. I used underlining here, which I normally wouldn't do, but it was one way to show off my main heading. And then for my subheading, I have a different format. And then for my subheadings, I have a third format with this in italic. So you can see right away how the guiding parts pop right out at you as a reader, as a reviewer. And you can see the different criteria right away. And I have not changed the wording, and I have not changed the positioning of anything other than to add the white spaces. So that's one possible solution. Very simple to do and easy to implement in a grant proposal, because even just adding in small amounts of white space doesn't increase the length dramatically. And doing things like bolding or using italics on your headings generally doesn't increase the space needed either. But it makes it so much easier for your reviewers to read this thing. So that's one, that's an actual physical way to give your reviewers a break by introducing some white space and some simple formatting. A more metaphorical way is to use shorter and simpler sentences. This is giving them a mental break. When you use shorter and simpler sentences, and I mean shorter and simpler than standard academic writing style, it's easier for your reviewers to grasp the idea in a sentence when it's simpler. Conversely, if a sentence is too complex or too long, it's easier for your reviewers to get lost in a sentence. So here's an example of too long, too complex. Obviously, it's too long if it's one sentence taking up this many lines, even on a PowerPoint slide. It's complex because it's got multiple lists in it. So list number one here, regions, ages, cultures, genders, conditions. List number two, social, political, economic, cultural, and geographic contexts. So it's too long and it's too complex to be able to read easily. You may or may not get lost by the end of it. If you're really paying attention, you can probably get through it okay. But why force your reviewers to work that hard? So what makes a sentence too complex? Clue number one is punctuation. Does it have multiple parts? Are they separated by commas and semicolons and dashes? Multiple items in lists, in brackets, in nested brackets. If you see these things in one of your sentences, you're probably making that sentence too complex and harder for your reviewers to understand. What makes a sentence too long? No standard definition for this. My rule of thumb is that in a standard grant proposal page using a 12-point font like Times New Roman or Garamond or whatever. Does it take up more than 3 lines? If it does, it's probably too long, and anybody reading it, especially your reviewers, is likely to get lost, lose track of what's at the beginning of the sentence by the time they get to the end of the sentence. And you don't want them having to do the extra work to go back and reread the sentence and try to figure out what's going on. So does it take up more than 3 lines? And does it include a long list of items or examples? When I say a long list, I mean anything more than maybe 3 or 4 items in a list, and more than one list within a single sentence. So what do you do when you're going back over the proposal that you've written and you find some sentences that are too complex or too long? The simplest solution is just to convert them into 2 or 3, or in some cases 4 shorter and less complex sentences. So I'm going to show you another example here that's even longer and more complex than the previous one. Don't try to read it through just yet, but you can see commas all over the place, semicolons scattered here and there, long lists of components, items, multiple lists, brackets, and all of the clues. And obviously it's going to be longer than 3 lines when you put it into a standard Word document. All of these are clues that this is too long and too complex. Now, what I would like you to try to do is read through the sentence and find points where this could be broken up into 2 sentences or possibly 3 or 4 sentences. Again, in the chat, you can just put the first couple of words for where you might break it. And I will give you a hint here. This is a trick question. So I'll let you think about it, read through it, put your ideas in the chat, and then we'll talk about why it's a trick question. So any ideas where you might end the first sentence if you were breaking this up, or where you might start a second sentence? Or are you still trying to figure out what it's saying? And I don't blame you if you're still trying to figure out what it's saying. It is a really messy sentence. So the first sentence could end after partnerships. See, I'm just trying to, yes, that would be a really good start. So one idea, it's important to enhance research and partnerships. So yes, thank you. That's excellent, both Clayton and Jeff. So start out with a simple short sentence like that. And then you can go on to talking about what kinds of things you're going to do to enhance those research and partnerships, harnessing big data, etc. You could also end or divide this long list of ways to enhance research and partnerships into multiple shorter lists. So you could have this first list that stops at epigenomics. Then you could go on to another sentence that starts and talks about the clinical, social, and other records. Another sentence on new drugs and other therapies. Another sentence on artificial intelligence. And here is where this is a trick question. This sentence wanders off into another topic. So they're talking about it being important to enhance research and partnerships by harnessing all of this stuff. And then they start talking about addressing unmet needs. So absolutely, that has to be a different sentence because it's a different idea. So, and for that, you could then go on to talk about the different kinds of unmet needs. And that's, again, a really long list, could be broken up into 2 or 3 shorter ones that focus on specific kinds of unmet needs. So policy, patient-oriented research, different kinds of health like parental health, environmental health, styles of research, etc. Breaking this up, yes, you're right, Clayton, breaking this up could make the paragraph very long. And you'd probably want to go back and see how you could combine some of the things into simpler ideas. But in its current form, it's essentially useless to your reviewers because they won't be able to understand what you mean. And if they can't understand what you mean, they're not going to get your point, and that makes the whole paragraph useless as it is. So, okay, relax from that one. I apologize for using a trick question, but it took me about 5 reads through that to actually figure out that there was a problem in that they switched topics halfway through the sentence. And it stuns me that anybody would write a sentence that long in the first place. All right. So we've looked at giving your reviewers a map in different ways, a couple of different ways to give your reviewers physical or mental breaks as you're writing through. The last technique that I want to talk about is giving your reviewers reasons to care. Now, writers of strong grant proposals know that the first impression for their reviewers is crucial. You need to grab their interest and give them a positive impression. And the question that's often at the top of the mind for reviewers when they start reading a grant is, why should we care? Why should we care as reviewers? Why should we care as a funding agency? Why should we care as a health system? Why should we care as Canadians? Within virtually every grant proposal, you have 3 prime locations to tell reviewers immediately why they and all those other groups like the funding agency and Canadians in general, why they should care. That's in your summary page, on your proposal's first page, and in your hook. And I'll talk about what a hook is when we get to that in another couple of minutes. In your summary page, the summary page is essentially another map for reviewers. This is the scientific summary that's going to outline all the sections of your proposal, give your reviewers concrete information on why your research is important, significant, high impact, and worth spending money to do it, worth spending money from the funding agency to do it. It's really critical in giving your reviewers reasons to care, because it's likely the first part of your grant application that the reviewers will read. Depending on the review process for a particular competition, it may be the only page that most people on the review committee will read. So you absolutely have to give them the crucial points for what you're going to do and why it's important, significance, high impact, and worth spending money on. Now, to make your summary page an easy read for your reviewers, you can actually apply many of the same techniques that we've already discussed, except probably putting in visuals. There's not usually space for that in a summary page. But you can use informative headings, you can use topic sentences, simple formatting, and within your summary, you can use sentences that are even shorter and more simple than what you use in your full proposal. So you can make the summary page an easy read, and make it very, very easy for reviewers to spot immediately why they should care about what you're proposing to do, why your research will have impact, is significant, is worth funding. So that's relatively straightforward. You also want to give reviewers a reason to care on the first page of your proposal. And the first page is not the same as the summary page. It doesn't or should not include information on all parts of the proposal. The first page is where you can expand on your goals and why the research is worth doing. So those are reasons for your reviewers to care. Now, if you look, this is just a list of some of the elements of a strong first page for a proposal. So a short, informative, striking opening sentence. You want to mention your overall goal, why the research is important and relevant, how it fits with your previous work, your hypotheses or research questions, and how you might approach them. For example, if you're doing research that requires theoretical framework, what theoretical framework are you using? A really quick outline of specific aims and methods, and a summary of your expected outcomes and potential impact. And plus, this is a really good place to put the visual that you're using as a map for your reviewers, whether it's your actual map or a flow chart or whatever. So these are all giving your reviewers information about why this is important work, why it's going to have impact, why they should care, and why they should recommend it for funding. So these are simple, brief summary explanations, and you're aiming to convince your reviewer that what you're proposing to do is logically the best possible thing to do in your field at this time. That's why they should care. And that's all on the first page of your proposal. And then your hook is that short, informative, striking opening sentence that gives immediate context for your reviewers. Many people start their proposal or their summary page or both with something really generic, like cancer is a health problem for Canadians. Not something that's necessarily going to grab my interest. Too broad. Everybody knows. Tell me something that's going to get my attention, get my interest about the work that you propose to do. A good hook can also indicate how your proposed research is part of solving a larger and very important problem. So again, giving your reviewers reasons to care about why you're doing this research. This is part of a big deal. Ideally, it's a statement that makes reviewers think, wow, I didn't know that. Tell me more. This sounds really important. So I've got a few examples of hooks here that I have anonymized, but these are from actual grant applications that I've worked on. First one, protein folding is a pivotal biological process in both health and disease. Possibly still a little generic, but I'm interested now in finding out how protein folding is such a pivotal process and why it affects both health and disease. The second one here is my absolute all-time favorite. Glaucoma is as common as heart disease. This really grabs my attention. It immediately, my first thought is, I had no idea that glaucoma was that big a problem. And it makes me want to read about why it's such a big problem and what you as the writer of the grant proposal are going to do about solving this problem, which is as much of a problem as heart disease. And then the third one, autism is the most severe form of a spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders, putting into a larger context of a very big problem. And you're going to look at a specific part of that problem and do what you can to solve it. So just before we finish up here, why don't you put in the chat, if you can think of any off the top of your head, or if you have a good one, either a good hook or a bad hook. And if you struggle to write a good starting sentence for your grant proposals, You're welcome to put in an example of something that you've struggled with, just so we can see people's ideas on what might work, what might not work. And while you are thinking about that and possibly putting in some suggestions, which I'll come back to, I just want to give you a few extra resources. These are all from the Research Services Office at the U of A, and these are from previous presentations or documents, tip sheets on writing for reviewers, writing a striking summary page, and writing a successful research summary. This last one is my favorite because it's a take from 4 different senior researchers at the U of A, very successful ones in getting grant funding, all of them looking at the problem of the epidemic of toe jam. And they look at it from all 4 of the CIHR themes: basic biomedical research, clinical research, etc. So those are resources that that you can get online if you want to see some more examples. Rita, a good hook. Yeah, the mortality rate of intestinal failure, liver disease in neonates can be as high as 50%. Wow. Yeah, that's something that's going to hit people hard and get their attention. So what are you going to do? What is this person proposing to do to reduce that mortality rate or to treat this type of liver disease? Nice one. Thank you. Oh, I like this. Yes, as Jess says, assuming medical trainees learn solely by showing up to work puts everyone at risk. Yeah, that would get my attention. Yes, and it's slightly informal compared to most things that you'd see in a grant application, but that can be a really good thing to get people started. It's short, it's striking, it's informative, it gives a context for the problem. Excellent example, thank you. Okay, I see we are at our time of 1 o'clock here to finish up. So just put up this last slide that gives contact information if you have further questions or comments on this. And I'll also be posting on the Visiting Scholar program a summary of some of the key points of this, and the recording and the slide deck will be available to you. So thank you all very much for being here, and thank you for your great input in the chat. I love hearing the kinds of things that you're thinking about and your ideas. Jeff, if you want to.
Yeah, I guess, again, Kathy, thank you for taking the time to share your expertise and the practical examples with our department members. We always have a combination of learners and faculty, and I think I can speak for everybody and say there's always practical things we can take away from these sessions. So thank you for sharing your tips on visuals, maps, strong sentences, giving reviewers a break. Everyone who's reviewed a manuscript or a grant will appreciate the sentiment. So, so thank you again, and thanks everybody.